Hi friends, welcome back to my channel, and in today's vlog I will be reading the top 10 most popular horror books for the first half of 2022 according to Goodreads. I was perusing Goodreads as you do, and I saw this list of the most popular horror books. I think it's like 79 or something like that, and I wanted to read them and see why they are so popular. In this video, I will be reading Sundial by Katrina Ward, Hide by Kirsten White, The Children on the Hill, Nettle and Bone, Devil House, The Violence, The Resting Place, Dead Silence, The Cherry Robbers, and The Hacienda. So I will not make this intro any longer than it needs to be because I will be giving you a summary of the book in my vlog clips. So let's just get right into the vlog portion of the video. So I have finished my first read of the video. However, let's talk about my first DNF first. This is the story of 14 people who all get invited to participate in a hide and seek at this abandoned amusement park, and I got about 20% of the way through this when I decided to DNF. The writing in this is so jarring. It constantly switches between points of view of the 14 different people. You are inundated with facts about them and their lives and their personalities. You are also switching points of view really rapidly from like one sentence to the next. Same paragraph, like one sentence. It just is very jarring, and this is a pretty short book. I think it's only 230 pages, and when I DNF'd it at the 20% mark, we hadn't even really started the hide and seek game. So I just, the writing was way too jarring for me, and despite it being so short, it was just not a good reading experience. So today I finished The Children on the Hill, and this is going to get a 3-star for me. And it's kind of a hard book to talk about. So this is a multiple POV story. You are following V, who is a young girl who, her timeline takes place in the 1970s, and her grandmother works for the Hillside Inn, which is a treatment facility located in the wilderness of Vermont, and she has a younger brother, and her grandmother introduces them to a new sister called Iris, who doesn't remember anything about her past. She doesn't talk, and Vi makes a promise to her that she's going to find out about Iris's past. You're also following the point of view of Lizzie in 2019, who is a monster hunter, and she is going to Vermont to investigate a missing girl who she believes to be someone from her past. She refers to her as her, and this being seems to use the advantage of local legends to kidnap women and make them disappear, essentially, and the women are never heard from again. So the women will claim that they saw Bigfoot and then they'll disappear. Because these women tend to be rowdy or misfits or problem children, no one really investigates. They just call them runaways and everybody moves on. You are then getting excerpts from a book that the children wrote, a manual for monsters, how to kill monsters, what they are like, things like that. And then you're also getting excerpts from a book that was written about the Hillside Inn. While you are in Vi's point of view, she's finding some things out about her grandmother, and kind of their position, or like what she's really doing and what's really going on, and what Iris's past really is. I really enjoyed this. This has very much a feeling of like Frankenstein. This is an ode to Frankenstein, as mentioned. This feels very like gothic. It's very slow mystery, and you're kind of just figuring out where these two stories, like how these two stories overlap, and you're also trying to figure out what's going on in this hospital and all of the dark past there, and it has this ominous feeling that the Frankenstein story has. As far as the gore level, I would not say there is too much gore in here. It's definitely more of a mystery. There really isn't too much like killings or anything going on explicit on page. For the apprehension or the unsettling, I would give it like a 2 out of 5. This has nothing to do with my rating, but I would say it's about a 2 out of 5. It wasn't unsettling in the way that I love in horror, which is like this creeping feeling that something bad is going to happen. It's more of just like this unsettling nature around the hospital and feeling like something weird's going on there, but it's not an apprehension that something is about to happen. For intrigue, I would give this like a 3. It's kind of your standard mystery, finding out about people's pasts and the like corruption going on around them and who's killing the girls in the future. While there is talk about monsters and things, there's never really a moment where you think it might actually be like a supernatural being. You're very aware that it is a person. And then as far as like the twists and things go, I would give it like a 2.5. It's very, very average. I figured out the majority of them, and I think the one that I didn't figure out is also pretty obvious. So it was good. I consumed this in like a couple of hours. Like I started this morning and I finished it in one day. So it's an interesting story. It's very slow, so if you don't tend to like slow, you don't like just straight mysteries, you probably won't enjoy this. And I don't necessarily think this is a horror, because when I think about horror, there are certain aspects of horror that I seek out. It's not something that I think will last with me, because it wasn't particularly gruesome, it wasn't thrilling, it didn't have any sort of conversation or commentary in it, didn't really have a massive impact. So this is definitely a 3 star. So I have finished Nettle and Bone, and this was very, 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 very good. I ended up giving this 5 out of 5 stars. This is the story of Mara, who is a second or third sister, third daughter to a king of a small kingdom. And in the beginning of the book, her oldest sister, gets married off to a prince of a kingdom bordering theirs, who the kingdom is very large. And within a couple of months, she is sent back dead. And they claim that she fell down the stairs, and then the second daughter is married off to him. We're alternating timelines between Mara currently, who is trying to kill a prince, and the past, where we are getting what led up to her deciding to kill the prince. She was sent to a convent. She found out that her sister was being abused, and having to stay pregnant to keep the prince from abusing her. And Mara decides that she is going to kill the prince in retaliation for him abusing her sister. So she finds a dust wife, which is essentially like a grave witch, someone who is able to raise the dead or commune with the dead. And this woman says that she, if she performs 3 impossible tasks, or give her something that will allow her to kill the prince. And one of the tasks is to make a cloak that is made of thorns, and is supposed to be like impossible to make out of this fabric. She's then supposed to make a bone dog. So we actually open the book with her creating the bone dog, a dog out of bones, that is like a living being essentially. And then the last task is she has to get the moon in a jar, or the witch will then help her on her journey to kill the prince. And she ends up bringing in 2 other people along the way, and so she goes on a journey with them to kill the prince. And it is a very delightful and dark fairy tale. It feels very fairy tale-esque. In regards to this being a horror pick, I would say this is darker than most fairy tales. It's very much like a grim fairy tale. I would definitely say it leads more towards the fantasy side. As far as gore is concerned, there isn't too much. There is some like kind of squeamish or dark language used, but there isn't like active body horror or gore or anything on page. And then as far as the apprehension or how unsettling this story is, I would say that it's not really all that unsettling. I would give the gore and the apprehension like a 0 or 1 star. This isn't the sort of story that I feel like is meant to create an unsettling atmosphere. But as far as intrigue, it's very, very high. I would give intrigue a 5. The way that the story is spliced together, it's initially hard to get into, but once you are familiar with the change in points of view and the world world and sort of the terms and things that are being thrown at you. It's very gripping, and you want to follow this band, this lost family, if you will, or found family, to their destination. You want to find out how this woman is gonna essentially save the day. Again, there aren't really that many twists. This is a dark fantasy, a grim fantasy. I don't really feel like twists are really what this is going for. So this is pretty short. It's like 230 pages, and I would highly recommend, if you are a fan of fantasy and you are looking for like a dark fantasy, this feels very much like a fairy tale. Like I would find this in a Grimm's fairy tale collection. So very much enjoyed this. 5 stars, and I would definitely recommend if that is what you're looking for, but for the purposes of this list, I wouldn't say it necessarily fits completely. Okay, so, to be completely honest with you, I was putting off doing this update because I didn't want to talk about Sundial, but I have now finished 2 books for this video, and I really need to do an update. So first, let's talk about Sundial. So this is told in 2 different timelines. We follow a woman who has some weird things going on with her daughter. She finds animal bones in her daughter's bedroom after a drugging incident between her 2 daughters. And she has a bad relationship with her husband. He is very abusive, and there's a lot of toxicity underneath the surface that isn't ever really discussed or talked about. They are just used as like chilling remarks, I guess. And then the other timeline is the mother's point of view when she was a child living on this like compound that feels very cultish. She was homeschooled, and they were doing experiments on dogs. They kind of lived by themselves. She had a twin sister, and they had various strangers and things coming in and out of their life, and it follows those 2 timelines. The mother takes her daughter back to the compound called Sundial to figure out what she wants to do with her. I really did not like this. This focused entirely too much on things that were irrelevant. Nothing was fully fleshed out, and the ending was very rushed and made little sense for the plot itself and for the story that was being told. It wasn't saying anything. The characters weren't that interesting. The plots and twists were not that intriguing. So I did end up giving this 2 stars, just because I don't give 1 stars to things unless they're like truly problematic. As far as gore, there isn't too much. There is a lot of descriptions about maggots. I don't know why Katrina Ward decided that that was like the most horrifying thing that they could write about, but there is like multiple scenes with maggots and like describing how maggots move, maggots being in things, but other than that, it wasn't that gory. As far as the apprehension or like its unsettling nature, I didn't really find it to be too apprehensive because of how slow it was. It wasn't building believable tension in a way that I was apprehensive about where the story was going. It was slightly unsettling just because it was hard to tell whether this compound Sundial was like a cult, like what were they really doing there, and what were the secrets, but it wasn't anything that I felt like I had to continue to read to get. And again, the intrigue, it wasn't really there. Like, sure, I wanted to continue to read because I didn't want to DNF this book, but I would have easily DNF'd it if I hadn't been reading it for this video. The intrigue was not high enough that I felt like I needed to be, that I wanted to get through the 200 pages of absolutely nothing, pointless plots and pointless stories to find out what the ending was. And then again, the twists were not that wild and outlandish, but the way that the twists were revealed was not that interesting. It was definitely a case of like everybody around the main character knowing everything and her just like finding out and then being angry and then finding out another thing and being angry. I'm sure it has an audience, but I just don't know who that is, and I'm definitely not one of those audience members. Let's get into The Resting Place, which is a book that I did enjoy more. So this is also told in 2 different timelines. You are following Eleanor, who witnessed the death of her grandmother who raised her, and she is now going to this house that she didn't know about that she inherited from her grandmother. This is it's set in Sweden, and it's a translated work, and she is going out to this like snowy country house. There is a lawyer there. There is her great aunt, or her aunt, and then her and her partner, her boyfriend or fiance or whatever he is. And then the other timeline is following this woman named Annika, who was a maid for Eleanor's grandmother, and it's set at the same house. So in the past timeline, you are seeing Annika dealing with Vivian, the grandmother, with her mood swings and her aggressive and cruel nature. And then in the current timeline, you are trying to figure out the secrets behind who killed Vivian. This was good. It was kind of your bog standard mystery book. I wouldn't say there's too many thrilling aspects. You have some people getting injured, some people disappearing for short periods of time. It's a very insular, closed off mystery where people are dying, very reminiscent of And Then There Were None, where you're all enclosed in this one area and the killer could only be one of a couple of people. You also have the inclusion of the other timeline of the past, and it was good. I think if you are into these kind of mysteries, you will enjoy this. I enjoyed the twist. I thought it was very realistic. I will say it wasn't particularly shocking. I did end up giving this 3 stars, but it's a very high 3. I tend to like these sort of mysteries. I find that they're never trying to do too much, and they never have that opportunity to fail because they're not trying to be thrilling in any particular way. The gore, again, is not really something that you're going to get here. There isn't too much gore. There's not really descriptions of anything going on. There's discussions of head wounds, people being hanged, things like that, but it's not descriptive in that way. As far as the apprehension, I definitely tend to feel it for these stories. I found that it was a little bit slow because there wasn't too much in the way of like aggressive or violent things happening, so the apprehension on that end wasn't really there, but I was very intrigued to know what this other timeline, where it fit into the story, who Vivian was, why someone would have killed her, and all of these family secrets. So the intrigue was definitely there, but the apprehension and the unsettlingness wasn't necessarily there. But I don't fully think that that's what it was going for. Like, I don't think it was supposed to be intensely scary. And then the last thing is the twist. Like I said, I enjoyed the twist. I tend to not expect too much from mysteries like this. And so if you can give me a good twist that is believable, makes sense, then I am on board. I enjoyed it. I think it fit in with the whole family dynamics, family history, while also pulling in the other timeline in a way that makes sense. It fit with all of the characters and the way the characters acted. So altogether, I think this is a really good mystery, a good insular mystery in the mountains. If you enjoyed these are coming to mind. If you enjoyed these, I think you'll enjoy this. So altogether, I don't have anything too bad to say about it. It's just kind of a good little mystery. I have decided to DNF the violence, and I am sad to DNF another book for this video, but I got 265 pages in, and quite frankly, this is not a horror, and I feel very confident in saying that. So this is told in 3 points of view, and it follows the world post-COVID, and we are following a new disease called the violence. It forces anybody to enter into like an unconscious state, and they perform an act of violence that usually results in the death of someone, and it's like sweeping the nation, and it comes in the form of like mosquitoes, like mosquito bites. We're following a woman who uses the violence to get out of an abusive marriage. She takes her 2 children to stay with her mother. So we're following the point of view of one of her children, her oldest child, who was in an abusive relationship with a guy in her high school. We follow her mother, who is the one that got out of the marriage, and then we follow her grandmother, who is also in kind of a like bad marriage in the beginning of the book, and we're following their lives as this is going on, and like there's not anything horror about this. Like, aside from the fact that there is a virus going on and there is like on-page abuse, like very, very tough abuse to read about, and like death of animals and things like that, I don't necessarily think this is horror. Like, I would not classify this as a horror. I think this is like a sci-fi. Or what is this book by St. John Mandel about a world post a pandemic? This is very much like this. I wouldn't consider this horror, and I don't quite know what the point of this is. Like, I can imagine that this is very cathartic for the author. It's like a pandemic story. It's not something that I want to read about. It's not interesting. It's very, very long for absolutely no reason. So I have decided to DNF this, and it's unfortunate because I've DNF'd 2 books for this video and I'm only reading 10 books. But I just don't feel like wasting time on a book that's not a horror book for a horror video. So, all right, friends, I apologize for the quality and the angle and not being set up on a tripod and all of that, but I finished Devil House and this is not horror. I don't know if Goodreads just like doesn't care to shelve things correctly, or if it's the readers not knowing what horror is, but this is basically about a guy who is writing a true crime book about a place where 2 murders were committed. And like, you're getting half the book talking about a true crime book that he wrote previously that has nothing to do with this book, and it's not horror, it's not good. It's the type of writing that you see with overindulgent, overwrought stories that have no contribution to the story itself, and it's just not horror. I'm very disappointed with how horror-less this top horror list is. Like, I don't know. It's just, I'm very disappointed. I was hoping that I would be getting the top quote-unquote 10 best horror books that have come out this year, and that's just not really the case, and I'm just very disappointed. So, on to the next one. Okay, so I finished Dead Silence, and I ended up giving this 3 stars. So this is about a space crew who discover this lost ship out in space after a distress signal comes through on like an old line, I guess. They decide to claim the finding the ship, so they go onto the ship to take some items from it to prove that they were here, and they discover the truth behind how the voyage was lost. And I don't particularly like these types of horror stories. They're kind of, in my opinion, like the cheap thrills of horror, and they don't do much for me. In the moment they can be scary, but overall it's not something that's going to stick with me because it doesn't have the good elements of horror that I'm looking for, the commentary, the like lasting impact. I just don't really find them with stories like this, where it's like very like insular, and you're trying to get out of the situation, there's something hunting them, that sort of deal. I just never find them to be impactful and interesting beyond the initial read. Objectively, this is definitely the most horror of all of the books that I read on this list, because it's just straight creepiness and like weird shit's happening the whole time. So it's definitely the most horror on the list. So like ranks number 1 on horror. Enjoyment, we'll get into that when I rank them at the end. But yeah, it ended up being a 3-star. I'm happy that we finally got a horror on this list, or a book that I would consider a horror on this list. But I'm confident about the Hacienda, and the Cherry Robbers I'm not too sure about. The Hacienda might not come through my library in time for when I have this video planned to post. Hopefully we have the power of God and anime on our side, and people will quickly read that and it'll get to me in time for this video. But the Cherry Robbers should come soon enough, so once I have read that, I will come back and update you. So I just finished Cherry Robbers, and I did end up giving this 3 stars. I wouldn't necessarily call this horror. I would more call it like a historical fiction with a gothic feeling to it. You start at the book with a woman getting a letter from a journalist saying, "I think you are connected to these deaths in this past." She's a famous artist, and this woman connects her to this girl that up and disappeared, who's after her entire family had died. And so she basically tells her, I want to do an interview, and this sparks a bunch of memories with the main character, and we are reading journal entries and also just like weird recounts of the past from her point of view, and like other women in her family. And so we start off with her older sister. There's 6 sisters, and then her mother and her father. Her mother has always been mentally unwell, and we slowly unravel that past as the story goes on. But it starts off with her older sister getting engaged, and her mother starts having like these very dark thoughts that something bad is going to happen to her daughter, and it escalates from there, and slowly the daughters start dying off until we get to the heroine, and it's dying in the age of like the order in which they were born, ostensibly the age they would get married, like the order they would get married. And so we are kind of just like in this creepy Victorian house called the Birthday Cake, out in the middle of nowhere, and it starts off very like scenic, and they're like going through wildflowers, and they're you know, living like this very like cottagecore dreamy life, Anne of Green Gables very feeling, and then it slowly starts becoming this really creepy thing. But it's never like very horrifying, it's never very like scary. The ambiguity behind the horror leads you to believe that it could be something supernatural, but it also could be like a family curse, but it also could be like a prophecy they brought on themselves. So you just don't really get any clarification, any answer, and it's just this kind of like creeping story about intergenerational trauma and like family dynamics and isolation and all of that. So as far as gore, there is literally zero. There's no gore here. There is some conversation around being ill, and there are a couple of scenes where the sisters are how the sisters die that are a little bit gory, but as far as like the feeling of gore or like the feelings that gore is supposed to bring up, it doesn't really have that. And I would say the same with like the apprehension. It's very, very slow, very gothic. If you're familiar with a gothic story where you quite literally feel like nothing is happening, there's just these very slow creeping moments of like dread. That's sort of how it is. It felt like just a regular gothic historical fiction. Same with the intrigue. I will say that the intrigue was like there because you didn't really know like where the story was gonna go or what was causing them to die, and in the beginning you don't know, unless you read the synopsis obviously, you don't really know like what the big deal is, and then once it starts happening you're kind of just sitting there waiting for the deaths to come. But once you know what's coming, it kind of ruins itself because there's a lot of like foreshadowing, so it loses a lot of the tension, and all of the deaths happen the same way and are caused by the same thing. So all of the tension of like who's gonna die next or why are they gonna die or how are they gonna die is like, it's already been revealed. You already know why it's gonna happen, and a lot of the deaths are seemingly off page. So the intrigue and the twists kind of all together, like that's not really, I feel like, what this book was trying to go for. I think it was just trying to be like this, I don't really know what the point of the story was, to be honest. I didn't love it. It wasn't a bad like listening experience because I listened to the audiobook, but it's just not my type of story, and I would have liked a little bit more horror. If you're gonna consider it a horror, I would just consider it, like I said, a gothic historical fiction. Okay, friends, I have finished the last book for this video, so let's talk about the Hacienda. So this is sort of just your stereotypical haunted house story. It is about a woman who, after the passing of her father, decides to get married. She marries a politician and she moves into his country estate. This is set after the Spanish Civil War, and she moves into this house that quickly asserts that it doesn't like that she is there. Now, I ended up rating this 3 stars. I think it's a good haunted house story. I think it's one of the best that I've read. I seriously considered giving it 4 stars, but some of the elements of it just didn't really work for me. Overall, the story behind the house and the writing behind the house was interesting. I think it did a good job of setting the house up as a haunted house. However, the conclusion, how it wrapped up, and the romance did not work. Let's talk about the 4 criteria that I have been discussing so far. So as far as gore, that's not really like what this is going for in the traditional sense of gore. I don't feel like you're going to get a lot of like blood and guts and stuff like that. The apprehension and the unsettling nature was definitely there, just because you don't know how this house is going to, like, how it's going to escalate, how the behavior is going to escalate, and like the intrigue is also there because you're trying to figure out the story behind her husband's missing ex-wife or dead ex-wife, and just all of that. And then as far as the twists, it wasn't like outside the realm of possibility. I think that was the issue though. Like if you are not a fan of ambiguous endings, you will really enjoy this. But me personally, I think a little ambiguity would have gone a good way with this. Like there is some ambiguity as far as like whether the house was actually haunted. Like there's a clear-cut answer to why everything is happening, if that makes sense. So I just didn't feel like the conclusion was satisfying enough. Like it was a lot of build-up and then the conclusion was kind of just like, oh. It wasn't my favorite, but it was definitely more horror-y than some of the others on this list. So let's get into how I would rank all of these books on their horror level and my enjoyment level.
So taking a look at my ranking, this is kind of how things stack up for me. Obviously Hyde I can't include in the ranking because like I didn't finish it. I didn't even really get that far into it. But as far as the horror of it all, like what you would turn to if you wanted to actually read a horror book, I would say this is the order. The violence was just like a dystopian novel about an illness. There wasn't really much horror going on. The Cherry Robbers, again, I would say not really much horror. It's more of like a gothic historical fiction. The Devil House read more like a crime fiction novel. The Children on the Hill, The Resting Place, and The Sundial, I would say had all about the same amounts of horror in it. Nettle and Bone, again, is more of like a horror fantasy, and then the Hacienda and Dead Silence are your traditional horror stories. And then this is kind of like how I would view my enjoyment of all of these books. Obviously, A Nettle and Bone and the Hacienda and The Resting Place were like books that I just genuinely enjoyed reading. Even though The Resting Place isn't necessarily a horror book, it's more of like a mystery with some light horror elements. I really enjoyed it. I'm a fan of just like regular mysteries, so my enjoyment of it obviously was pretty high. And then the Hacienda was a good haunted house story. It's everything that I wanted from a haunted house story, despite some of the other elements being kind of lacking. And then Nettle and Bone was my absolute favorite of all of the reads. This is a story that stuck with me over the months that I have been filming this video, and it's something that I would readily recommend to anybody looking for a good fantasy or a good horror. It's just a good all-around grim, dark fantasy that I just really enjoyed.
So that is how this video went for me. Definitely let me know down in the comments your thoughts on anything that I read. As far as the Goodreads picks for this go, I mean, I really feel like it's based on probably how many people shelve it, and the tags of all of these being horror are definitely off, but Goodreads is not the most reliable platform for actually being accurate. So again, let me know down in the comments your thoughts on anything that I read. I would love to hear it. If you've read it and agree with my opinions or disagree with my opinions, definitely let me know. If you don't have anything to say, leave some sort of horror, Halloween-y related emoji down in the comments. If you're looking for more content from me, you can follow my Instagram or my podcast Instagram. You can follow my podcast on all your favorite streaming platforms. It is a horror podcast. Do not forget to subscribe if you want to watch more videos coming up. And thank you so much for watching. I will catch you guys in my next one.